Hello, my name is Dalian Adofo, and I'm co-director for a series of documentaries that explore African spirituality called Ancestral Voices. My journey into African spirituality itself, I would say the eureka moment was when I was at a Buddhist temple in West London, where we started discussing the Eightfold Principles of the Buddha, and me realizing that most of the principles that were being explained at that time, I could actually find them in many of the African proverbs that I had heard growing up myself as a young child in Ghana. And the need for the film itself, or deciding that we had to make this series of films, came from conversations I had with my wife, because her background is from the whole New Age movement, because she was raised up in a non-religious household. So through our conversations, we realized that there's a lot of information out there about various religions, whether it's Western religions or Eastern religions, but hardly anybody gives African religions, so to speak, any time of day, and when it's spoken about, it's usually very negative. And whereas, with her understanding from the whole metaphysical movement and my understandings based on the various religions I had explored, we decided to come up with a documentary series that would explore the subject in some detail. In African spirituality, and actually in general in all indigenous spiritualities, what we call the world is not just what we can, perceive with our eyes or see physically, There's the understanding that there's an interaction between forces, between a world that is physical, that we can see the physical manifestation of, and then there's the world that is intangible, and this is not so difficult to understand, because even as an individual, when you look at yourself, you can see your physical body, but you've never seen what we call your animating spark. Where is that spark? Because when we die, no one can locate our memories. It's not like a computer hard drive where you can go and say, okay, here are the files, I can store them here. So even within ourselves, you can see this duality of being. There's the physical vessel, and then there's your mind, where we can never trace those thoughts when we're dead and gone. Where do these thoughts go? This is what within African spirituality, I guess, is referred to as your not only your life force, but also your God consciousness, because you have a connection with God. You're not really separate from God or the Creator. So the spirit world is, think of it this way, it's almost like the yin to a yang. It's the balance. There's this duality that's constantly in operation, and we communicate with this spirit world because we see balance in our lives, balance and harmony between both worlds, and we can communicate with that spirit world via a range of practices, really. Libation can become one of them, where by pouring this water to the earth, you're symbolically opening a channel of communication with people who may have passed over, because it's understood that they exist within this intangible reality. So libation is one, and calling out maybe names of people who've deceased. Any scientist will tell you, by speaking even, you can generate energy. So speaking is not just an act of communication, it's also an active act of creating energy, whether it's heat energy or kinetic energy when we move. So that physical act that you're performing with the libation is able to manifest something, because it's energy that you're putting into that act. That can be, that can manifest as maybe something that you desire, because by you dropping the libation, you might be requesting for, an ancestor to help you with a particular problem that you have. And that energy that you use in that action then gets almost transmuted back into creating that which you ask for. So that's one way of communicating. There's also setting up an altar. And an altar really is just a space where, again, you can focus your mind, project your mind, energy and thoughts onto the things that you want to manifest, Or it can also be a place where you remember those who have gone before you and who have done beneficial things for you. So the altar, in a sense, becomes like a doorway into this spiritual realm. And it's also a place where you can communicate with your ancestors, because it's something that you've almost put out in commemoration of them. And you can actually even receive many messages in dreams. We all know about dreams that are prophetic. Where do these dreams come from? Remember, a dream, again, is an intangible experience. It's something that you can, in a sense, visualize, but you can't touch a dream. This is where we find concrete evidence of the presence of a spiritual realm to this physical one that we inhabit. Your ancestors, as a general term, refer to people in your family who have passed before you, or who have died and passed on. In African spirituality, the term ancestor can also specifically mean an individual who lived their life so well that it not only benefited themselves, but also the community at large. So then that person, on their passing, is almost put in a high position in society. You know, what today we will call a role model. Someone who inspires others to do great things. That's what an ancestor is within African spirituality. In layman's terms, it might seem quite a silly idea, the idea that you can communicate with the dead. You know, they're dead and gone, what's the point? And this is actually one of the things that has been used to stigmatize African spirituality for years. But however, what we're finding now in recent discoveries in Western science is that within our DNA, we find evidence of how our ancestors actually still play a part in our lives. So there was, it's an American university, and what they discovered was that if you had, let's say, a grandparent that had a fear of spiders, it would pass through the DNA and you would inherit that fear. So what we find is that our ancestors still play an important role in our lives. And perhaps what the early European missionaries didn't understand was the way the Africans were expressing to them that you can still communicate with your ancestors, because they're part of you. You are the latest version of your ancestors. You see, because without them, you wouldn't even be alive. And within your DNA exists their very consciousness. So within African spirituality, it's not uncommon at all that you can speak to your ancestors. Definitely not. As a matter of fact, they're always around for you to seek, guidance or assistance. One of the pieces of, evidence that we find that links the practices of the Asian Cometians to modern day Africans as well as the diasporans is the way nature becomes another conception for creator or the ultimate creator. And what's interesting is when you look at nature, not only does it provide us with all our needs, whether it's medical needs or sustenance needs, you find three important ideas with nature that you can see how it's been drawn into what we call religion. The first being omnipotent, meaning all powerful. Now, I can only just pick an example of, let's say, the Japanese earthquake that they had. And Japan is meant to be the most technologically advanced country in the world. But nature could show us that it was more powerful than anything that man could come up with. Yes, so we have that destructive ability to nature to show its power. Then there's the next idea, which is omniscient, which means all-knowing. Now, when you look at the way the seasons change, when you look at the way the planets align themselves, you know there's an inherent intelligence behind nature. It's not just green grass, so to speak. Yes, so we find that idea also behind nature. So there's the omnipotent, omniscient, and then the omnipresent. Now, where would you go across the globe where you will not find evidence of nature? Even in the desert, there's still ecological systems that are still thriving. So what you find within African spirituality is that nature becomes a very important archetype for the way Africans conceptualize this idea that we now call God, because it's all encompassing, it's everywhere, and it's in the African spirituality, it's also within you, the individual. It's what they call your life force, popularly known as Ashe among the Yorubas. The Akans also have it, it's called Sunsum. You are a manifestation or an extension of this God consciousness. And one of the reasons why you're here is to manifest a divine purpose, yes, that adds to the knowledge of the God consciousness. So African spirituality actually is a system that allows you to draw in inherent power as opposed to looking for a savior. You know, one is all empowering and the other kind of puts you in a position of being subservient to someone else. So the African conception of the creator as it relates to nature is that nature itself is a manifestation of the creator. It's one of the ways in which we can see the creator's works or the creator itself. And I explained about the three ideas about the omnipotency, omniscience, and the omnipresence. How and why, again, it proves to us why we are an extension of God is when the body dies, or when we die and the body is put into the earth, in a few months, what does the body become? It becomes earth. So we actually have the physical evidence to show how we're connected to nature. Yes, and the role nature plays, because, you know, before the development of synthetic drugs and whatnot, where did we get the particular compounds and molecules to treat ourselves? Nature gives us everything in its totality. You know, there's herbs for healing broken bones, there's herbs for arthritis, there's different herbs for, even within my own Akan tradition, even to cure bad breath. Yes, nature gives us everything that we need. Hence, it's not surprising that it will be revered as God. And how we know we're connected to God and come from God is when the body is put in the earth, we find that it reverts back to that state. So one of the areas of similarity that makes us aware that this is a system that has survived across millennia is, for instance, the concept of God. And when we say God, most people know God as a religious concept and identify with it as a man sitting in a place doing all these wonderful things. But when we look at the African spiritual philosophy, we find that Africans had a wider and deeper thought. You know, you cannot just God, or what we rather call the creator, because within the African system, creation comes from a masculine and a feminine principle. You can't have one principle alone creating something. So the other conception of the creator that we find among Africans, which is totally different from that which we find in the Abrahamic faiths as an example, is that of the creator or God being feminine. Because within the African ideology, what we find is the idea of God becomes the process of bringing life forward. So if we look in one of the oldest books of creation among the ancient Egyptians or Kemetans, we find that the manifestation of the male god, Amen, comes after he declares himself that he comes from the primordial waters of his mother, called Nun. So that we then find that the first, in a sense, Godhead is female. Now, when we even come back into modern times, let's say among the practitioners of Vodun in Benin or in its legacy in Haiti, again, you find that the idea of creation coming forward is attributed to the female or the feminine principle rather than the male. So these are some of the pieces of evidence that we found that has made us identify that the spiritual systems of the Kemetans is the same as what we find in contemporary times on the continent and in the diaspora. You see, very often when we bring up the topic of African spirituality, the first thing people tell you is that, oh, what do you mean? That juju stuff, that obia, you know, that witchcraft. And it's a bit sad because when we say that, it's almost like saying Islam is IS or Christianity is the Crusaders who went around and killed thousands of people. all in the name of their God. We cannot conflate. Every system, everything in existence has a duality to it. There's a positive aspect to it, and then there's you could say, a negative aspect that people choose to use. So what we call witchcraft is principles within African spirituality that people might use mainly for selfish gain. It's usually for their own gain. It might be something material, it might be to make money, it might be to get a partner, and it's only for self-gratification. But remember, as I've said from the beginning, African spirituality is a system of finding your own power. It's about remembering why you decided to manifest in this body and live this life journey. So it has nothing to do with self-gratification only, because one of the ultimate purposes within African spirituality is that when you pass, you are held in a position of an ancestor, a person who lived such a life that people want to emulate that lifestyle. You are an inspiration to them. That's what African spirituality is. Witchcraft is just using principles within African spirituality for your own selfish gain. If you would like more information about the work that we do, or to even get a broader understanding of how far our research have come, because we put quite a lot of free content online, if you go to www.ancestralvoices.co.uk, we have free material sharing our research, because ultimately we'd like to put the ignorance of witchcraft to rest. It's causing a lot of problems around the world, per se. There are people being murdered, children being abandoned, all in the name of ignorance. So go to our website, www.ancestralvoices.co.uk. Feel free to download some of the free material, read, inform yourself, and rid yourself of some of the colonial ignorance that we all suffer from.